It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today. I've been asked to talk about Sustainable Development Goal 17 on partnerships, a little bit about where we are at, and also a little bit about how my own country, Sweden, works with SDG 17, both internationally and in Sweden in the context of our own implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, as everyone knows, the Sustainable Development Goals have to be seen as a whole. There can be no cherry picking of the goals if we want to reach them, since they all relate. Fighting poverty, hunger, climate and environment, biodiversity, energy, gender equality, peace and human rights. None of this can be addressed in isolation. But Goal 17 has a particular role because it starts to respond to the question of how we do all this. And the answer is in partnership. And we're talking of many types of partnership. It can be partnership between member states of the UN, for example, through development cooperation and transfer of technology. It can be partnerships within member states, through all stakeholders such as civil society, the private sector, trade unions, indigenous peoples, young people. And it can be partnerships between all these actors across borders as well. So halfway through to 2030, we should ask ourselves how we're doing when it comes to Agenda 2030 and if we're working in partnerships as we all committed to do. This question is urgent. There is no shortage of challenges, and it's clear that we have been losing ground when it comes to Agenda 2030, in some countries more than in others. We're at the tail end of a worldwide pandemic. We're not out of it, but we're starting to see the end of it, or at least a stage where we will have to find ways of coexisting with the COVID-19 virus. We're in a climate crisis, a planetary crisis, which is showing its face more than before through fire, floods and drought. We're running out of time and no country is doing enough at the moment. We're also at the point in time where a European country, Ukraine, has been invaded by a much larger country, Russia, and is fighting for its existence. Apart from the horrors of this aggression, it has made worse an already difficult situation when it comes to food insufficiency in several parts of the world. Many countries have had setbacks when it comes to rising costs, inflation, and national debt, and things have started going in the wrong direction when it comes to many of the SDG indicators. We need multilateralism more than ever, which means we need the UN more than ever. And partnerships are key, because what we need is a more inclusive UN, where voices from young people and from civil society are heard more than they are today. We need to hear the critical voices, the voices that demand more of us and see through our excuses for not doing more. Important decisions to be taken are to be taken not with short-sightedness, but with the perspective of the future generations in mind. And last year, the Secretary General issued the report, Our Common Agenda. Our Common Agenda is in no way a replacement for Agenda 2030. Instead, it's to be seen as an accelerator for Agenda 2030, precisely by focusing on a more exclusive approach. And there has been some progress. Last week, the General Assembly took a decision to establish a youth office of the UN. Negotiations are underway on a declaration for future generations, and preparations have also started for a summit of the future. And it's crucial that such a summit be inclusive of different stakeholders. We must take the opportunity of this summit of the future to make the UN more inclusive. That doesn't mean that member states will talk less to one another. Member states from all over the world will always be at the center of the UN. It's just not enough. and it does not even reflect how we do things back in our respective countries. At the country level, it works best when a myriad of stakeholders work together. No one can make a green transition without the private sector. No one can strengthen gender equality or protect human rights without a strong collaboration with civil society. Indigenous peoples need a voice in the countries where they live, etc. So if partnerships is best at the country level, we must find a way of reflecting it in the work of the UN. Now let me talk a little bit about Sweden's work with Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. Sweden presented its voluntary national report in 2021, and it was the second time we reported. The process was partnership-driven, and there were stakeholder platforms with and between private sector, civil society, research communities, and municipalities, among others. We also took advantage of the peer review process, working with Colombia and with Finland, comparing notes, and there were also some VNRs for individual cities in Sweden also working with cities elsewhere. Human rights and gender equality was at the center of the process, and climate and environment also, of course, front and center of this agenda. And some challenges were identified. Comes to income disparities, situation of persons with disabilities, situation of newly arrived immigrants, young persons, and gender equality disparities. And it's all about not leaving anybody behind, and there's certainly lots to do still. One conclusion was that SDGs cannot come from above, but it must be present in all local, regional, and national government processes. So training and information is key. And when it comes to our work internationally, a large focus for us is on development cooperation and humanitarian aid, where Sweden is a major donor. Since 2016, Sweden devotes 1% of our GNI for international development cooperation and humanitarian aid. The Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA, is a key actor in working worldwide with these issues, and SIDA also supports and coordinates some work with Swedish government agencies where they can work on advisory functions. For example, the Swedish taxation authorities support with know-how agencies corresponding in other countries in the south, and same with the statistics agency, the patent agency, etc. Sweden is also a member of the European Union and an active one at that, so that's also a way in which we work. We also have taken a number of initiatives in the arena of the UN. We're great believers in the UN and the collaboration we can have there, and we initiated together with Fiji an Oceans Conference, the first one a few years back, and this year we hosted with Kenya an international UN meeting in Stockholm, the Stockholm Plus 50 conference on the environment. And this conference marked 50 years since the first UN Environment Conference in 1972, and it had a strong youth and civil society participation, and this participation proved to be very important for inclusion. Youth participants, in fact, greatly pushed member states to make stronger pledges than they might have otherwise made. So we need to stick with our common agenda to make it the UN we want and need, a more inclusive one. And I'd like to finish by quoting the Secretary General from the report. He said, "We must now come together to save succeeding generations from war, climate change, pandemics, hunger, poverty, injustice, and a host of risks that we may not yet foresee entirely. This is our common agenda." Thank you.